A few weeks ago, I made a video about this, which was a Japanese garage kit from the 90s. This is relatively rare and valuable, and I've had it for years in my collection just in its raw resin form. But after making the video about the kit, I decided it was finally time for me to try and paint it. So that's what this video is about. I will warn you, this is not going to be a step-by-step video where I show you every part of the painting process. I'm just going to kind of show you the finished product and maybe talk a little bit about what the experience was like painting it.
And here we have the finished piece, and I'm really happy with how it turned out overall. There's always something I can find that I could have done better, or that I, might want to go back and tweak or something, but you kind of have to just say, I'm done, and cut it off, unless it's, I discover there's something really egregious, like, a spot that is just white without any paint or something like that. I'd probably go back and touch that up, but I'm not going to go in and try and tweak all of these anymore. I have glued them all into place at this point, which I think is kind of a necessity with this set, because otherwise they just kind of all, they don't sit that well on the throne, and they would move around and possibly get broken. So I did some experimentation with placement of the various characters and ended up with this, and I just decided to use some epoxy glue and stick them in place. I did, paint all of them individually first, of course. I used Army Painter War Paints for basically everything. That's just what I have on hand. And I used a brush for almost everything. Jabba was probably the one I was most concerned about, just because I don't want to mess up, the central figure here. It was tricky in some sense, because I wasn't sure what to do with these lips. My initial attempt was to make them kind of like Rolling Stones, bright red with lip stickers up there, but it didn't quite work for me, so I decided to make them more of a peach color. I think it looks a little strange if they're the same color as the body, so they need to be a little bit redder, I think. I used, for the body, this is about the only place I used the airbrush, just to get some nice gradations between the green and the orange. And yeah, I think it turned out pretty well. It's definitely a challenging figure to paint well. Here we have Salacious Crumb. I was tempted to maybe put some tufts of artificial hair here somehow and around his neck, and I might still do that. I haven't quite decided, but I decided, for the moment, I would just paint him as he was supplied in the kit. The throne itself, I think, turned out well. We've got this grayish color as an undercoat, but then I went and did some subtle brown washes on it to make it look kind of dirty. And then we've got my typical approach for the gargoyles with a bronzy color and then some almost bluish green patina on it. It looks like corrosion. Leia was definitely one of the more challenging of the figures to paint, just because, well, first of all, I often have trouble getting realistic skin tones, and I don't know how well I did it here, but it doesn't look too bad. And then faces are also a challenge sometimes, and when you've got a face like this, all the more so. But I think she turned out relatively well overall. I, of course, used this chain that came with the kit and glued them on either end there so that, it would be sort of arranged in the way that I wanted it. And that's another reason why gluing the figures down, I think, is important as well. Bitfortuna here is definitely one of the creepier sculpts in this set, but I think it turned out well. I really like the way he looks here. It's definitely a unique take on this character. So we have Boba Fett and Han in Carbonite here. Han was by far the easiest paint job. It was basically just paint it black, go over it with, a little sort of gunmetal color and do a little bit of black wash to kind of get the details to come out nicely, but not much trouble there. And by contrast, of course, Boba Fett was the most difficult, or at least the most complex paint job, because you've got all this stuff on his armor, and I didn't even include everything. I just wanted to kind of make it look enough like Boba Fett that it would be believable. C-3PO here. The main thing I was concerned about was his eyes, which I think actually turned out decently well. And of course, also the metal color might be a little too deep. I don't know. There's different ways of tackling this. I just basically did a dark brown undercoat and then did some layers of gold on top of that, and then some brown wash on top of that. So that's pretty much it. I've had this set in its raw resin form for years, and was a little bit reluctant to try and paint it up because I didn't want to mess it up. But I think it turned out well enough. I think I did it justice, and that was my main concern. I'm happy to have it now in this form in my collection, and I hope you enjoyed seeing it too. Thanks very much for watching. This video was brought to you with the help of my Patreon supporters, including these Palace VIPs, Angelica Brady and Jesper Murtu. The support I get from my patrons goes directly back to the channel to pay for things like resin, paint. I bought my airbrush using money I got from patrons. And so if you'd like to help support what I'm doing here on the channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find the link in the video description.